The morning sun streamed through the towering glass windows of Sterling Industries headquarters, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor of the lobby. It was exactly 9:45 a.m. when a young man in his early 30s wheeled himself through the revolving doors, his crisp navy suit and matching tie reflecting his attention to detail. He had spent extra time that morning making sure everything was perfect, from his freshly pressed shirt to the leather portfolio containing his resume and certificates. After all, this wasn't just another job interview. This was an opportunity he had been preparing for over the past 6 years, building his experience and earning his master's degree in business analytics while working full-time. The security guard at the front desk greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "Good morning," the man replied, his voice carrying a quiet confidence. "I'm here for the 10 a.m. interview with HR for the senior analyst position." The guard typed something into his computer and nodded. "And yes, I see you right here on the schedule. Let me just call up to let them know you've arrived." He reached for his phone, but before he could make the call, a sharp voice cut through the ambient noise of the lobby. "I'll handle this, George." The voice belonged to a woman in her mid-40s, wearing a designer suit that seemed to serve more as armor than clothing. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached, each step radiating authority. Her name tag identified her as the hiring manager, but her expression suggested she'd already made certain judgments before a single word was exchanged. The young man extended his hand, maintaining his professional demeanor. "Hello, I'm here for the senior analyst position. I brought extra copies of my resume and—" "Are you sure you're in the right place?" She interrupted, making no move to accept his handshake. Her voice carried a tone that made several nearby employees pause their conversations. "The Disability Services office is actually in the building next door." The lobby felt quieter than it should have been at that hour of the morning. A few employees lingering near the coffee cart exchanged uncomfortable glances. One young intern nearly dropped her tablet, her eyes widening at what she was witnessing. The man's hand remained extended for a moment longer before he slowly lowered it, his dignity intact despite the obvious slight. "Ma'am, I can assure you I'm in exactly the right place. I have an interview scheduled for the senior analyst position. I have my confirmation email if you'd like to see it." He reached for his portfolio, and as he did so, a small collection of prestigious certificates became visible. Among them was a gold-sealed master's degree and several industry certifications that even the hiring manager had to squint to read, not because they were small, but because they seemed to contradict every assumption she'd made in the past 30 seconds. The young intern who had nearly dropped her tablet earlier was now standing very still, her phone partially hidden behind her portfolio, but its camera clearly capturing every moment of this interaction. She wasn't the only one paying close attention. A smartly dressed woman standing near the elevator bank had stopped checking her emails and was now watching the scene unfold with growing concern. Little did anyone know, but these next few moments would completely transform not just one career, but an entire corporate culture. And it all started with what happened next. The hiring manager looked down at her tablet, her lips curling into what could barely pass as a professional smile. "Well," she said, drawing out the word like she was teaching a kindergarten class, "I suppose we can proceed with the formalities, though I should warn you, we maintain a very fast-paced environment here." Her emphasis on fast-paced didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the lobby, least of all by the woman near the elevators who had now taken several steps closer, her badge revealing her as someone far more significant than anyone had initially realized. The tension in the lobby was building like a thunderstorm about to break. For those watching, it was clear that the next few minutes would determine far more than just the outcome of one job interview. It would reveal the true character of not just individuals, but of the entire organization. The hiring manager's heels clicked against the marble floor as she circled around the young man's wheelchair, her movements reminiscent of a shark sizing up its prey. The lobby's usual morning bustle had fallen to a hushed silence, broken only by the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant ding of elevators. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "since you're already here, let me explain a few things about our company culture." She emphasized these last two words as if they were somehow beyond his comprehension. "We pride ourselves on having a very dynamic workforce." The young man adjusted his tie calmly, his fingers brushing against the silver tie pin his father had given him upon completing his master's degree. "I understand completely," he replied, his voice steady and professional. "My previous role involved managing multiple high-priority projects simultaneously. I'd be happy to share some specific examples." "Oh, honey," the hiring manager cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Let's not waste each other's time. Our employees need to be able to rush from meeting to meeting, run to catch deadlines, jump through hoops." She paused deliberately after each action verb, her smile growing more predatory with each one. By now, a small crowd had gathered near the coffee station, their paper cups forgotten in their hands. The young intern from earlier had positioned herself behind a large potted plant, her phone still recording every word of this increasingly uncomfortable exchange. The woman by the elevators, the one whose importance remained unknown to the hiring manager, had pulled out her own phone and appeared to be typing rapidly, her expression growing stormier by the second. "I assure you," the young man began again, his patience remarkable in the face of such blatant discrimination, "my abilities to meet deadlines and handle multiple responsibilities are well documented in my portfolio. Would you like to see the quarterly reports from my previous position? We increased efficiency by 47% during my tenure." The hiring manager laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that echoed off the lobby's high ceiling. "Sweetie, let me be more direct since you're not picking up on the hints. This is a prestigious position. We need someone who can," she gestured vaguely at his wheelchair, "well, someone who fits our image better." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Someone dropped a coffee cup, the sound of it hitting the floor eerily loud in the tense atmosphere. The young man's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair slightly tighter, the only visible sign that her words had affected him at all. When he spoke again, his voice remained composed, though it carried a weight that commanded attention. "Ma'am, I believe you're making some incorrect assumptions about both my capabilities and the law. I'd be happy to discuss my qualifications for this position, which include a master's degree, 6 years of relevant experience, and multiple industry certifications. Or would you prefer to continue making discriminatory comments in front of all these witnesses?" The hiring manager's smile faltered for the first time. She glanced around, suddenly aware of their audience, but rather than backing down, she seemed to double down on her position. Her next words would prove to be the ones that sealed her fate. "Listen here," she hissed, leaning down so her face was uncomfortably close to his. "I don't care what degrees or certificates you have. This is my department, and I decide who fits in. And let me tell you something, someone like you, you don't fit in here. You can't even reach half the files in our storage room." The young intern's hand flew to her mouth in shock, nearly dropping her phone. The woman by the elevators had stopped typing and was now walking purposefully toward them, her badge swinging with each determined step. The young man maintained his composure, though his eyes reflected a mixture of disappointment and determination. "I see," he said quietly. "And would you mind putting that statement in writing? Or perhaps you'd prefer to repeat it to your superiors?" The hiring manager straightened up, smoothing her designer suit with manicured hands. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, her voice rising. "Because I can assure you, nobody in this building will take your word over mine. I've been here for 15 years, and I know how things work." What she didn't know was that her career wasn't going to last another 15 minutes. The woman from the elevators was now just feet away, and the look on her face suggested that things were about to take a very dramatic turn. The lobby had become so quiet you could hear the gentle whoosh of the revolving doors as another employee entered, immediately sensing the tension and freezing in place. The young man's next words would be spoken softly, but they would echo in the hiring manager's memories for years to come. "Ma'am," he said, reaching into his portfolio, "I'm not threatening you. I'm simply giving you an opportunity to reconsider your position before I share these recordings of our conversation. Yes, I've been recording too, along with my documented qualifications with your HR department and legal team." The hiring manager's face began to shift through various shades of red and white as the reality of her situation started to dawn on her. But before she could formulate a response, a voice behind her would change everything. "Excuse me," came a crisp voice from behind the hiring manager. "I believe we need to discuss what's happening here." The woman from the elevator bank now stood directly behind the hiring manager, her company badge clearly displaying her title, Executive Vice President of Operations. The hiring manager's face, which had been flushed with self-righteous anger moments before, now drained of all color. I was just explaining our company's requirements to this applicant, the hiring manager stammered, her previous confidence evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. The young man in the wheelchair remained composed, his portfolio still open on his lap. The executive VP raised her hand, cutting off any further excuses from the hiring manager. "I've been standing by those elevators for the past 10 minutes, the VP said, her voice carrying the weight of authority without raising its volume. "I've heard every single word. And I have to say, in my 20 years with this company, I have never been more disappointed or disgusted by what I've witnessed." The lobby had grown so quiet that the soft whir of the young intern's phone camera seemed thunderous. The small crowd of employees who had gathered to watch hadn't moved, their coffee cups still suspended halfway to their lips, their expressions a mixture of shock and satisfaction at seeing justice unfold. "Ma'am," the young man in the wheelchair spoke up, his voice steady and professional despite everything that had transpired. "I came here today hoping to discuss my qualifications for the senior analyst position. I brought data showing my track record of success, including the projects where I increased efficiency by 47% at my previous company." He pulled out a series of graphs and charts from his portfolio, each one meticulously prepared. "I also developed a new data analysis system that saved my previous employer over $300,000 in my first year. I'd be happy to explain the methodology." The VP held up her hand again, but this time her gesture was gentle, almost apologetic. "Please," she said, "you don't need to justify your presence here. Your credentials speak for themselves." She turned to face the hiring manager, whose complexion had taken on an almost gray tinge. "What needs to be justified," the VP continued, her voice taking on an edge of steel, "is how someone in a leadership position at our company could display such shocking discrimination and unprofessionalism." The hiring manager opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Around them, several employees had pulled out their phones, some typing rapidly, no doubt sharing what they were witnessing with colleagues on other floors. "You should know," the young man added calmly, pulling out another document from his portfolio, "that I also have a certification in corporate diversity and inclusion practices. I've actually conducted training sessions on workplace discrimination at my previous company." A few people in the crowd couldn't suppress their smiles. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The VP nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of experience and perspective we need here." She turned to address the hiring manager directly. "Your office, now." As the hiring manager turned to follow the VP, her designer heels no longer clicking with the same authority they had moments before, the young intern stepped forward from behind her potted plant. Excuse me," she said, her voice shaking slightly but growing stronger with each word. "I have the whole interaction recorded. And I already sent it to HR. I hope that was the right thing to do." The VP's expression softened as she looked at the intern. "Yes, that was exactly the right thing to do. We can't change a culture of discrimination unless people are brave enough to document it and speak up." Turning back to the young man, the VP's professional demeanor returned. "Sir, I apologize for what you've experienced here today. Would you be willing to join me in my office? I believe we have a lot to discuss about your qualifications and how they might be put to use in an even more senior position than the one you applied for." The young man looked surprised for the first time that morning. "I would be honored," he replied, gathering his materials back into his portfolio. As they moved toward the elevators, the crowd of employees parted respectfully. The security guard, who had witnessed everything from his desk, gave the young man a thumbs up and a warm smile. The hiring manager watched them go, the reality of what she had done, and what it would mean for her career, finally sinking in. She had walked into the lobby that morning at the height of her power, certain of her position and authority. Now, not even 15 minutes later, she was about to learn exactly how quickly 15 years of career building could crumble under the weight of her own prejudice. The young intern, still holding her phone, looked at the recording one last time before hitting the send button again, this time copying it to the Corporate Ethics Committee. Sometimes, she realized, The biggest changes start with the smallest acts of courage. The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of corporate justice. Word of what had happened in the lobby spread through the building's 14 floors like wildfire, carried by instant messages, hurried whispers, and knowing glances between co-workers. The hiring manager sat in a conference room on the 12th floor, her designer suit no longer projecting the authority it had just an hour ago. Across from her sat 3 members of the HR team, the company's legal counsel and the executive VP. On the table between them lay a tablet playing a recording of her lobby performance, her own voice echoing back at her with devastating clarity. "Would you like to explain your actions?" the HR director asked, her tone professional but cold. "Because from where I sit, I'm seeing multiple violations of company policy, federal law, and basic human decency." The hiring manager shifted in her seat, her carefully crafted excuses crumbling before she could voice them. "I was just trying to maintain our company's professional standards," she attempted, but even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. "Professional standards." The legal counsel interrupted, looking up from his notes. "Let's review what those standards looked like in practice." He began reading from the transcript of the lobby incident, each quote more damaging than the last. Meanwhile, 2 floors down, the young man sat in the executive VP's spacious office, his portfolio open on the elegant conference table. The VP wasn't alone. She had been joined by the chief technology officer and the head of innovation. "Your data analysis system is fascinating," the CTO commented, examining one of the graphs. "Especially how you've integrated accessibility features into the core design rather than treating them as add-ons. This could revolutionize how our entire team works." The young man nodded, his quiet confidence even more apparent in this setting. "Universal design benefits everyone," he explained. "When we make systems more accessible, we often discover more efficient ways of doing things that help all users." Back in the conference room, the hiring manager's world continued to unravel. The HR director slid a document across the table, its official letterhead stark and unforgiving. "Your actions today haven't just opened this company up to potential legal action," the VP stated firmly. "You've violated everything we stand for as an organization. The fact that you've been in a leadership position, potentially influencing hiring decisions for years, is deeply concerning to us." The hiring manager's hand trembled as she reached for the document. Are you firing me?" Her voice had lost all traces of the condescending tone she used in the lobby. "Effective immediately," the HR director confirmed. "We'll have security escort you to clear out your office. Your company credentials have already been deactivated." "But I've been here 15 years, she protested, her voice rising. "You can't just." 15 years, the legal counsel cut in, "during which you may have discriminated against countless qualified candidates. We'll be conducting a full review of all your hiring decisions, particularly the ones where candidates with disabilities or from minority backgrounds were rejected." The hiring manager slumped in her chair, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. Her career, her reputation, her carefully constructed professional image, all destroyed by 15 minutes of revealed prejudice. In the executive VP's office, the atmosphere could not have been more different. The young man was explaining his ideas for improving company workflows, his eyes bright with enthusiasm as he outlined potential innovations. "You know," the VP said thoughtfully, "the senior analyst position you applied for. It's not going to be adequate for someone with your skills and vision." She exchanged glances with her colleagues before continuing. "We've been looking to create a new position, Head of Digital Transformation and Accessibility Integration. Based on what we've seen today, both in terms of your qualifications and your character, I believe you'd be perfect for the role." The young man's composed demeanor briefly gave way to genuine surprise. I'm honored," he said, collecting himself quickly. "What would this role entail?" As the VP outlined the position, one that would put him in charge of a team and give him the authority to implement company-wide changes, the intern from the lobby was having her own moment of recognition. The HR director had called her up personally to commend her quick thinking and courage in recording the incident. "We need more people like you," the HR director told her. "People who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right. How would you feel about joining our corporate ethics committee as a junior representative?" Throughout the building, the story of what had happened in the lobby became more than just office gossip. It became a catalyst for change. Employees began sharing their own experiences with discrimination, both here and at previous jobs. The company's internal messaging system lit up with discussions about creating a more inclusive workplace. By the end of the day, the hiring manager's office was empty, her personal belongings packed into a cardboard box, her career in shambles. But up on the executive floor, plans were already being made for a company-wide transformation, one that would turn this morning's ugly incident into a powerful force for positive change. The young man wheeled himself to the elevator bank at the end of the day, his portfolio now containing an offer letter for a position far beyond what he'd initially hoped for. As he passed through the lobby, the security guard gave him a warm smile and a knowing nod. "See you Monday," the guard said cheerfully. Monday, the young man confirmed with a smile, reflecting on how differently this day had turned out than he'd expected. Sometimes, he realized, the worst moments can lead to the best opportunities, especially when people of conscience stand together against discrimination. By the next morning, the story had spread far beyond the confines of the corporate office. The intern's video, shared through internal channels to HR, had somehow found its way onto social media. While faces were blurred and names weren't mentioned, the impact of what had transpired was crystal clear. The company's phones started ringing nonstop. News outlets wanted statements. Social media managers were overwhelmed with messages. But unlike many viral corporate moments, this one was taking an unexpected turn. "Have you seen the comments?" one of the PR team members asked, scrolling through their phone during an emergency morning meeting. People are actually praising how quickly the company handled the situation. The fact that there were immediate consequences is resonating with people. The executive VP sat at the head of the conference table, her laptop open to a flood of emails. "We're getting messages from disability rights organizations, diversity and inclusion experts, and other major corporations. They want to know about our policies and procedures." A knock on the conference room door interrupted their discussion. It was the young intern from yesterday, clutching a folder to her chest and looking nervous but determined. "Come in," the VP called out warmly. "Everyone, I think we all know who this is. Our colleague who had the courage to document yesterday's incident." The intern stepped forward, her voice stronger than she expected. "I've been reading all the online comments and discussions. People are sharing their own experiences with workplace discrimination. I thought, maybe we could do something more with this momentum." She opened her folder, revealing a carefully prepared presentation. "I spent all night working on this. It's a proposal for a company-wide initiative on inclusive workplace practices. And," she paused, gathering courage, "I think our new head of digital transformation and accessibility integration would be the perfect person to lead it." Meanwhile, in another part of the building, the young man who had weathered yesterday's discrimination was settling into his new office. The facilities team had already modified the space to be fully accessible, working overtime to have everything ready. But what touched him most was the steady stream of employees stopping by to introduce themselves. "Your story inspired me to finally speak up," one developer said quietly. "I've been hiding my anxiety disorder for years, afraid it would affect my career. But seeing how the company handled yesterday, maybe it's time to stop hiding." The young man nodded understandingly. "You know what's interesting?" he replied. "When we create an environment where everyone can be themselves, productivity actually increases. I've got some data on that I'd love to share with you." Back in the PR department, things were getting increasingly busy. A major business magazine wanted to do a feature story on corporate accountability and workplace inclusion, using yesterday's events as a jumping-off point. But more importantly, other companies were reaching out to learn. The former hiring manager's LinkedIn post isn't getting the sympathy she probably expected, one team member noted. The disgraced manager had attempted to tell her side of the story online, but the responses were overwhelmingly critical of her actions. "It's actually sparking an important conversation," another added. "People are sharing stories of times they wish they'd spoken up against discrimination but didn't. It's making companies realize they need better reporting systems and stronger policies." By lunchtime, the company's CEO had called for an all-hands meeting. The large auditorium was packed, with remote workers joining via video conference. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Yesterday, we witnessed both the worst and the best of human behavior in our workplace, the CEO began. We saw blatant discrimination, yes, but we also saw ordinary people standing up for what's right. An intern who knew recording that interaction might put her own job at risk. A security guard who made sure the incident report was detailed and accurate. Employees who immediately sent evidence to HR. The young man sat in the front row, his presence a powerful reminder of how quickly things can change. Just 24 hours ago, he'd been subjected to horrible discrimination in the lobby. Now he was about to be introduced as one of the company's newest executives. The CEO continued, "Today, we're announcing a complete overhaul of our hiring practices. But more than that, we're launching a new initiative." He gestured to the intern, inviting her to join him on stage. Her proposal folder was still clutched in her hands, but now it bore approved stamps from HR and the executive team. This young woman's quick thinking didn't just help us address one incident of discrimination, the CEO explained. It showed us we needed to do more. Starting today, we're launching a comprehensive program to make our workplace truly inclusive. The intern stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and confident as she outlined her proposal. In the audience, phones stayed down. Everyone was too engaged to even think about recording. As the meeting concluded, the young man wheeled himself onto the stage to thunderous applause. But it wasn't just applause for him. It was celebration of a moment when an entire corporate culture began to transform. Later that afternoon, as he organized his new office, he found a handwritten note that had been slipped under his door. It was from the security guard. "Thank you for showing us all how to handle ignorance with dignity. You didn't just change one company today, you started a movement." He smiled, pinning the note to his bulletin board. Sometimes the worst moments in life become catalysts for the best changes, especially when people choose to respond with dignity rather than anger, and when others find the courage to stand up for what's right. 2 weeks had passed since the lobby incident, and the ripple effects were still spreading. The former hiring manager's story had become a trending topic in business circles, but not in the way she'd expected. Instead of sympathy, her actions had sparked a nationwide conversation about hidden discrimination in corporate America. The young man, now settled into his role as head of digital transformation and accessibility integration, sat in his office reviewing resumes. His team was growing faster than anyone had anticipated, with qualified candidates reaching out from across the country. "You've got another interview panel in 10 minutes, his assistant reminded him, poking her head through the door. "And I think you'll like this candidate." She developed an AI system that automatically generates alt text for visually impaired users. He smiled, thinking about how different this was from his own interview experience just weeks ago. Now he was the one conducting interviews, making sure every candidate felt welcomed and respected regardless of their background or abilities. Down in the lobby, things had changed too. The security desk now displayed a prominent sign about the company's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. The guard who had witnessed everything that day had been promoted to head of security operations, with a special focus on creating inclusive safety protocols. "You know what's funny?" the guard mentioned during a coffee break. "That incident actually made our jobs easier. People are more respectful now, more aware of how they treat others. It's like everybody finally realized we're all just humans trying to do our best." The intern who had recorded the video had become something of a corporate hero. Her proposal for inclusive workplace practices had been approved with a substantial budget, and she now led a task force implementing changes throughout the company. "I never thought my first job would involve presenting to the board of directors," she admitted during a mentoring session with the VP. "But when you see something wrong, you can't just stand by and watch." The VP nodded approvingly. "That's exactly why we fast-tracked your career development program. Leadership isn't about titles, it's about having the courage to do what's right." In the HR department, the transformation was even more dramatic. They had hired a specialized team to review all past hiring decisions, reaching out to previously rejected candidates who might have faced discrimination. "We found 23 cases just from the last year," the HR director reported during a management meeting. "Qualified candidates who were rejected for questionable reasons. We're contacting each one personally to apologize and discuss new opportunities." The company's actions were having an unexpected effect on their bottom line too. After the story went viral, their job applications had tripled. Top talent from diverse backgrounds was specifically seeking them out, impressed by how they had handled the situation. "Our investor calls have never been more positive," the CEO mentioned during lunch. "It turns out doing the right thing is actually good for business. Who knew?" His joke earned chuckles, but everyone knew the truth. Ethical behavior and business success could go hand in hand. The young man's accessibility initiatives were already showing remarkable results. His team had redesigned the company's internal software to be more inclusive, and productivity had increased across all departments. "It's not just about ramps and screen readers," he explained during a company-wide training session. "It's about creating an environment where everyone can contribute their best work without artificial barriers." Even the building itself was changing. Construction crews were upgrading facilities throughout the office, not just making things accessible, but truly welcoming for everyone. The clicks of the former hiring manager's heels had been replaced by the sounds of progress and renovation. One morning, as the young man arrived at work, he noticed something different in the lobby. The wall that had witnessed his discrimination now displayed a massive mural, commissioned by the company. It showed a diverse group of people working together, with the company's new motto beneath it: "Success is built on dignity, respect, and inclusion." "What do you think?" the CEO asked, appearing beside him. "The artist we hired is actually someone your team helped recruit. She does amazing work despite having limited mobility in her hands." "It's perfect," the young man replied, noticing how the security guard was proudly explaining the mural's meaning to some visitors. "But you know what's even better? The real change is happening behind these walls." Later that day, during a virtual conference where he was the keynote speaker, someone asked him if he was angry about what had happened that day in the lobby. His response would be quoted in business schools for years to come. "Anger changes nothing," he said thoughtfully, "but action changes everything. What happened to me was unfortunate, but look at the result. Hundreds of lives improved, policies changed, and a company transformed." Sometimes the worst moments become the best catalysts for positive change. In the audience, the intern who had recorded the video smiled, thinking about how one small act of courage had sparked such massive change. She looked down at her phone, where another company had just reached out asking for help setting up their own inclusion program. The former hiring manager, meanwhile, had become an unwitting case study in corporate training programs nationwide. Her LinkedIn profile now served as a warning about how quickly discrimination could destroy a career, and more importantly, how it had no place in modern business. But perhaps the most significant change was the one you couldn't see. Throughout the building, people were different now, more aware, more supportive, more human. They had witnessed firsthand how standing up for what's right could transform not just a workplace, but an entire corporate culture. 1 year had passed since that fateful morning in the lobby. The young man wheeled himself through the same revolving doors, but this time as Executive Vice President of Innovation and Inclusion, the youngest EVP in company history. The lobby looked different now. The once sterile corporate space had been transformed into a warm, welcoming environment. The security guard, now Security Operations Director, greeted him with a bright smile. "Big day today," the guard said warmly. "The news crew is already setting up in the conference room." Today wasn't just any day. It was the 1-year anniversary of what employees now called the turning point. A major business network was doing a special report on how one incident had transformed not just a company, but had sparked change across corporate America. "Remember when they used to make excuses about why they couldn't hire people with disabilities?" The guard chuckled. "Now they're calling us every week asking how we achieved a 40% increase in productivity after implementing your accessibility programs." The young man smiled, remembering how different things had been just 1 year ago. As he made his way to his office, employees greeted him warmly. Many of them were new hires. The company had grown significantly over the past year, becoming known as one of the most inclusive workplaces in the country. The intern, now the Director of Corporate Culture and Inclusion, was waiting in his office with a stack of papers. "You won't believe these numbers," she said excitedly. "Employee satisfaction is up 85%. Turnover is down 60%. And our job applications, we're getting top talent from around the world." He wheeled himself to his desk, taking in the view from his corner office. "And the best part, Other companies are following our lead. How many inquiries did we get last month? 37 major corporations have asked for our inclusion playbook, she replied, flipping through her notes. Oh, and remember that tech giant that used to be known for their hostile work environment? They just hired their first chief accessibility officer. The morning news interview went smoothly. The reporter was particularly interested in how the company had turned a potentially devastating PR crisis into a movement for positive change. It wasn't just about firing one person who showed discrimination, the young man explained to the cameras. It was about building something better. We showed that inclusion isn't just morally right, it's good business. After the interview, he had a video call with a support group for professionals with disabilities. A young woman shared how his story had given her the courage to apply for her dream job. They tried to tell me the position wasn't suitable for someone in a wheelchair, she said. I showed them the article about your company's success. They hired me the next day. Later that afternoon, the company hosted a special event in the auditorium. Employees filled every seat, with others joining virtually from offices around the world. The CEO took the stage, but he wasn't alone. Standing with him were representatives from 20 other major corporations. 1 year ago, we witnessed how quickly discrimination can destroy careers, the CEO began. But we also learned how standing up against discrimination can build something extraordinary. Today, I'm proud to announce the formation of the Corporate Alliance for Workplace Inclusion. The young man wheeled onto the stage to thunderous applause. Behind him, a screen showed the initiative's impressive first-year results. Over 100,000 new jobs created for people with disabilities, a 200% increase in diverse hiring across member companies, and billions invested in accessible workplace technology. But the numbers don't tell the whole story, he said into the microphone. The real change is in the stories I hear every day. The software engineer who finally felt safe revealing his autism and now leads our most innovative projects. The sales director who no longer hides her prosthetic leg. The countless employees who say they can finally bring their whole selves to work. The former intern stepped up next, her confidence now matching her conviction. Remember when I was scared to speak up that day in the lobby? She asked the audience. Now I train other people to be brave, to stand against discrimination, to be the change they want to see. As the event concluded, the security guard approached the young man with a surprise. He had kept the original incident report from that day, neatly preserved in a frame. I kept this as a reminder, the guard said, holding up the frame. Not of the discrimination, but of how one moment of courage can change everything. The young man took the frame, reading the date that had changed so many lives. You know what's amazing? He reflected. That hiring manager thought she was ending my career. Instead, she accidentally started a revolution. Later that evening, as he prepared to leave the office, he passed the lobby mural one last time. A group of new hires was admiring it, reading the company's motto about dignity, respect, and inclusion. Excuse me, one of them called out, recognizing him. Would you mind telling us the story behind this mural? We heard it started with something that happened right here in this lobby. He smiled, wheeling closer to the group. Well, he began, it's not just a story about discrimination. It's a story about courage, change, and how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best transformations. It all started one morning, right where you are standing now. As he shared the story once again, he couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. The company hadn't just changed its policies, it had changed its soul. And somewhere out there, he knew, other companies were following their lead, other brave employees were speaking up, and other lives were being transformed. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage. And sometimes, what looks like discrimination's victory becomes inclusion's finest hour.